Hello, welcome back to the channel where my friend and colleague James Disdale and I are about to test two exciting new sports saloons estates. James, what have we got?
Yes, we have the Peugeot 508 SW by Peugeot Sport and the BMW 330 XE Touring. So they are high performance estate cars with a difference because you can plug them in and run on electricity, or you can use internal combustion power.
Now we can't quite sit in the same car at the same time just yet, so we're going to take a car apiece. But before that, let me run you through the full technical details of each car. The BMW 330e has a 4-cylinder 2-litre turbo petrol engine mounted longitudinally under the bonnet. Between the engine and its 8-speed automatic gearbox sits an electric drive motor. From the gearbox, drive goes to the back, but there's also a little takeoff that sends mechanical drive to the front wheels, so this tends to be when it's needed rather than 50-50 all the time. So the BMW behaves largely like a rear-wheel drive car, but it gets drive pushed to the front when the rear wheels start to find traction is a little bit troubled. The petrol engine makes 181 brake horsepower and the electric motor chips in with another 87, but because they don't make maximum power at the same time, the total system output is 249 horsepower and 310 foot-pounds, which is quite a lot less than the Peugeot. The battery sits above the rear axle and at 7.6 kilowatt hours it's smaller than the Peugeot's, which gives the BMW a slightly shorter all-electric range. In our tests, about 18 miles versus 20 miles. It is a lighter car though, by about 100 kilos, and because it's a BMW, that weight is more evenly split front to rear, but the Peugeot is still the faster car. We've taken both to a test track, and you can find road tests of both of these cars in Autocar magazine, all good news agents every Wednesday, or at autocar.co.uk, or on digital subscription. But in all of those places, you will find the Peugeot has done a 0 to 60 sprint in 5.7 seconds to the BMW's 6.3. And now what I think of the BMW 330e. Now, if you have spent time in BMW drivers' cars before, you will note that they may have drive modes. So on something like an M car, it may run from Comfort all the way through to Sport Plus. This car does have drive modes too, but they are a bit different and a bit unusual. So there is a Sport, which gives you the most amount of power that it thinks you want when you ask for it. Sorry, forgive that thing occasionally blinking. It's because it's got gesture control and I move my hand and it thinks I want to turn the stereo down. There's a hybrid mode which gives you maximum fuel consumption, and if you plug something into the sat-nav, it kind of works out what might be best to use as you go. If you stick it in electric, it'll give you electric power as much as possible and the car won't go as fast as it would if it was using everything. And then if you put it into adaptive and again you set a program in the navigation, it should work it out for you as to what you want at any given time, what it thinks you want at any given time. So if you're on an A road, it'll think, yeah, I'll give you a bit of internal combusted power and I'm going to save some electric juice for when you get into town later. So that's what replicates the sort of conventional drive mode setup you would find in an ICE car. What's quite reassuring about the way it drives and familiar about the way it drives is the fact that the engine and the motor are both the other side of the gearbox, if you like. So by the time you take control of the gearbox here, slip it across into manual mode and control it either on the stick or via the paddles, what you do here is exactly what happens to the car. It's not just second guessing you by putting electric power to a motor that you are not in control with. So from that point of view, it is true to BMW's ultimate driving machine mantra that they have. You are the one who's in control of it all, and there's something quite nicely reassuring and familiar about that. So the way BMW has set this drivetrain up kind of suits a sporting saloon or estate car. You know, it adds the efficiency that you would want from a plug-in hybrid, but it retains that sort of level and control that you want as a driver's car. And that goes into the rest of the interior, which is entirely familiar BMW stuff. So it's all very driver-centric. You get a really good driving position. Steering wheels may be a bit fat-rimmed, but you know it's round and it comes close. There are paddles attached to the wheel. It is a good driving environment. So from that point of view, I like it very much. If there is a criticism, it's not about the handling per se, because it's nicely balanced. This is four-wheel drive, but it feels largely rear-wheel drive in its handling setup and the way it's balanced. So as you turn, the steering picks up a nice amount of weight and feel, and it's an engaging driver's car. If there is a criticism, it is that when you see a sharp surface imperfection or the edge of a pothole, you just know there is going to be a big thump back through the cabin as you go over it. This car runs on run flat tyres, and they tend to have quite a sort of stiff sidewall so that they can run with no air in them, but that does affect the ride in a negative way. I'm just about to sort of run over a bad surface there, and I don't know if you can hear it, but I can hear it in here, and I can certainly feel it in here as well. It doesn't have the level of sort of compliance that the Peugeot does. How much that matters, it's kind of up to you really. I know how much it matters to me, but I don't know how much it matters to James. So let's go and see what he thinks of that car and this one. The 508 is powered by a 1.6 litre turbo petrol engine mounted up front, driving through an 8-speed automatic torque converter gearbox. That engine makes 197 brake horsepower, but it is augmented here at the front by an additional electric motor, making 109 brake horsepower too. Drive to the rear is completely separated from that, though this car is four-wheel drive. At the back axle is a 111 brake horsepower electric motor, with drive for these motors provided by an 11.5 kilowatt hour battery, which is mounted underneath the back seats. Now, if you take the engine, 197 horsepower, and you add the motors together, because not every element is making its maximum power at the same time, maximum overall output of all of those things together is 355 brake horsepower and 384 pounds-feet. We've weighed one of these 508s and it came out at 1,892 kilograms, balanced 53% to the front, 47% to the rear. The power to weight ratio then is 189 brake horsepower per tonne.
Okay, so the Peugeot 508 SW by Peugeot Sport Engineering. This essentially is the face of fast Peugeots for the future, I guess. They're looking to go electrified, whether that be plug-in hybrid or fully electric. They're abandoning fully internal combustion engines for their quick stuff, and do you know what? It's quite a nice looking face, isn't it? You've probably seen the outside shots. Compared to the BMW is a very familiar face. We all know what a 3 Series looks like, and a very handsome thing it is too. But this Peugeot, particularly in SW form, I think looks really nice, really good. It's properly sharp. I'm not so sure about the canals or the turning vanes or whatever you like to call them down on the skirts. That's a bit much, but all the little green accents, those big brake discs. Now, those brake discs are the same as the ones that were used on the 308 GTI by Peugeot Sport, and they are distantly related to the ones Peugeot used on its 206 World Rally car, which is really cool to me. Now, rest of the car, Peugeot are marketing this as a properly quick hybrid, and well, it's not hard to see why, because it is. Essentially, at the front, we've got a 197 brake horsepower 1.6 litre turbocharged engine. Sandwiched between that and an 8-speed automatic gearbox is another electric motor, that's 109 brake horsepower, and then on the back axle is another electric motor, which is 111 brake horsepower, I think. Now, do your basic maths and that adds up to a figure that's quite big, but Peugeot have capped the overall horsepower at 355 brake, which is quite a lot, and the torque figure is something outrageous, like 386 pounds-foot of torque, I think. So as a result, the Peugeot is properly quick. It's particularly quick in sport mode, and we've got a number of modes here where you can go through hybrid, comfort, eco, all those sorts of things, electric, which does exactly what it says on the display, which is to run in pure electric mode. In sport mode, you get sharper throttle, steering adds a bit more weight, and you also get the 3-stage dampers in their most firm setting. In that mode, all the motors are assisting, so you're getting essentially 4-wheel drive when you absolutely give it the berries, and in mid-range terms, it absolutely takes off. It's quite quick across the ground. It's curiously quiet, even in sport mode. They've added a kind of augmented to the exhaust note, but it's very, very faint. It's more GT than it is full-on performance car. Now, the official figures, 0 to 62, 5.2 seconds, capped at 155 miles an hour. They don't really tell the full story. There are quicker cars, and because the whole thing weighs 1,875 kilos, it's quite a heavy old Hector. So it relies on all that mid-range muscle to create a real sensation of speed. I mean, it's still quicker than the BMW because it's got more power, even though it's heavier. Now, even though it is heavy, it actually disguises its weight quite well, and that's down to the work the chassis engineers have put in. Now, as we've already mentioned, there are 3-stage adaptive dampers, but it's been tuned by the same people that gave us the 208 by Peugeot Sport and the 308 GTI by Peugeot Sport. And that last one, the 308, for me is one of the most underrated hot hatches of the last few years. And what they've done with the 508, as with the performance, the way it's delivered, it's not razor sharp. It's got that old school French feel to it. Even in its most firm setting, the suspension has a nice fluid, slightly languid feel about it, but the control's there, the damping control is there. The steering, it's there's not much in the way of feel, but it's quick, it weights up nicely, it's good progression. You get a sense of what the front axle's doing. You can throw this Peugeot at corners and it clings on really nicely, and you can use the four-wheel drive traction to fire you out of corners. It's not as pure as the BMW because you've got a rear axle driven by a motor and a front axle driven by a different motor. It can sometimes get a little bit confused, so you get a bit of torque steer, and that sort of to and fro between the motors can be exacerbated by this 8-speed gearbox, which isn't the quickest to change gear, and when it does, it can sometimes just send a little bit of a thud through the driveline. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but compared to the best DCT gearboxes, it just feels a bit slow-witted. But the rest of the time, it's a really pleasurable thing to drive. It's different. It kind of has that French national characteristic that I thought had been lost. Like I say, it's a fluid, languid kind of feel. It flows down the road. Yes, you can grab it by the scruff of the neck and throw it around if you want, but it's at its best when you sort of feed it into corners, pour it into corners, and you can feel the suspension just breathing with the road surface. It is a bit firm at low speeds, but that's as much the big wheels as it is the suspension. The rest of the car is pure Peugeot 508, so there are things to delight and things to frustrate. So pillarless doors, really like that. It's got a big boot, that's properly practical. Decent space inside here, even if you do feel a bit cocooned. If you're used to your BMW or your Mercedes or your Audi, they've obviously tried very hard to give this car a premium feel. Lots of dust attracting gloss black trim, soft touch plastics, but there are some plastics lower down that still just aren't quite up to scratch. And of course there's the iCockpit display, which Peugeot says sort of is a halfway house between a head-up display and a normal display. I don't find it too annoying, but to get the driving position where I want it, with the steering wheel high and the seat low, I'm cutting off the bottom half of the dial, so it's not perfect, but it's good resolution. You can do lots of customizable stuff with it. Same with the infotainment, which looks good. They've got some more hotkeys now. It's not quite as much touchscreen dominated as it was before, but it's not as slick as the BMW system. Other little things, the paddles are connected to the column, not to the wheel, but they're quite small, which means if you've got even a bit of lock on, you can't get your fingers on the paddles occasionally. But there's nothing here that really totally puts you off the Peugeot, and the looks, that drivetrain, and more importantly that chassis with its lovely sense of fluidity. I think it's a lot of money, but if you've had BMWs and Mercedes or Audis for a few years and you're looking for a change, I don't think you'll be disappointed. It's not quite at the top of the class, but it's a definite viable alternative. It's an interesting alternative, and that's the main thing. It's an alternative that will be quite rare, I suspect, due to its price and due to the fact it's got a Peugeot badge on its nose. This car is no longer the mainstream. It's not a premium brand, but it's not a mainstream brand anymore. And so if you're looking for something exclusive, very likeable, fast, and that, if you want to, will do 26 miles on electric range when you plug it in, which it will do, oh, I think you could do a lot worse. You really could.
As is so often the way with these kinds of tests, the car you should buy is probably, well, just the one you want. The ergonomics and infotainment make the BMW the narrow choice for me, but James thinks slightly differently, and I have to concede that objectively, he's probably right. The Peugeot has a great blend of ride, handling and steering that makes for a really entertaining sports estate car. You can see the full written verdict in Autocar in print or on digital subscription, and join us again here for more twin tests, reviews, news and features. If you subscribe and click the bell icon, you will never miss one. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.